The Vanishing of Zebb Quinn. Chapter 1. The Last Shift. The fluorescent lights of the Walmart electronics department buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the rows of televisions, stereos, and video game consoles. Zebb Quinn stood behind the counter, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the glass display case. The digital clock on the wall inched closer to 9 p.m., marking the end of his shift and the beginning of what should have been an exciting night. Zebb's co-worker, Robert Owens, leaned against the counter, his lanky frame hunched over as he scrolled through his flip phone. "You ready for this, man?" Robert asked, glancing up with a grin. "That eclipse is going to be sweet." Zebb nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness fluttering in his stomach. "Yeah, can't wait to check it out. Just hope it's as good as the ad said." As he spoke, Zebb's gaze drifted to the window, where the darkness of the January night pressed against the glass. Asheville, North Carolina, lay beyond, a city on the cusp of change as the new millennium dawned. The Y2K panic had faded into memory, leaving behind a tentative optimism that Zebb could feel in his bones. The clock struck 9, and Zebb wasted no time clocking out. He shrugged on his jacket, familiar weight of his pager, a comforting presence in his pocket. As he and Robert made their way through the store, the fluorescent glare gave way to the softer light of the parking lot. "You sure you don't want me to drive?" Robert asked as they approached Zebb's blue Mazda Protégé. Zebb shook his head. "Nah, I got it. Besides, if I buy this Eclipse, it might be one of the last times I drive this old thing." The car's engine coughed to life, and Zebb pulled out of the parking lot, the heater slowly warming the interior against the winter chill. As they drove, the lights of Asheville's downtown flickered in the distance, constellation of possibility. "So, tell me more about this girl you met," Robert said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Misty, right?" Zebb felt a warmth creep into his cheeks that had nothing to do with the heater. "Yeah, Misty Taylor. Met her at that Christmas party at my mom's fiancé's restaurant. She's something else, man," Robert chuckled. "Sounds like someone's smitten. She know you're looking at this car to impress her?" "It's not just for her," Zebb protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I mean, yeah, I want her to like me, but this is for me too, you know? New millennium, new car, new Zebb." As they drove, Zebb's mind wandered to his plans for the future. Enrolled at Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College, part of ROTC, dreams of becoming a commissioned officer. All of it seemed within reach. The Eclipse wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of the life he was building for himself. They turned onto Long Shoals Road, the streetlights casting intermittent shadows across the dashboard. Zebb's former high school loomed in the distance, a reminder of how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. "You ever think about where we'll be in a few years?" Zebb asked, voice thoughtful. "Like, will we still be working at Walmart or—" Robert shrugged. "Who knows, man? Way I see it, we've got our whole lives ahead of us. No need to rush things." Zebb nodded, but something in Robert's tone made him glance over. There was a tension in his friend's jaw, a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Before Zebb could ask about it, his pager buzzed insistently in his pocket. "Hang on," Zebb said, pulling over to the side of the road. He fished out the pager, squinting at the small screen in the dim light. The number displayed was unfamiliar, sending a small shiver of unease down his spine. "Everything okay?" Robert asked, leaning over to look at the pager. Zebb frowned. "I'm not sure. I don't recognize this number. Mind if we stop at that gas station up ahead? I should probably call back, make sure it's not an emergency or something." Robert nodded, settling back in his seat. "Yeah, no problem. We've got time." As Zebb pulled back onto the road, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The night air seemed colder somehow, the shadows deeper. He glanced at Robert, then back at the road ahead, unaware that these would be the last moments anyone would see Zebb Quinn alive. The gas station loomed ahead, fluorescent lights a beacon in the darkness. Zebb pulled in, the gravel crunching under the tires. "I'll just be a minute," he said, climbing out of the car. Robert watched as Zebb jogged towards the payphone, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. As the distance between them grew, so did the weight of the secret Robert carried. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and waited for the night to unfold. In that moment, as Zebb Quinn reached for the payphone, The gears of fate began to turn. The mystery of his disappearance was about to begin, leaving behind a web of questions that would haunt Asheville for decades to come. Chapter 2: A Night of Mystery. The payphone's plastic receiver felt cold against Zebb Quinn's ear as he punched in the number from his pager. His breath came out in small, visible puffs in the chilly January air. Behind him, the gas station's flickering lights cast long shadows across the deserted parking lot. In the distance, his blue Mazda Protégé sat idling, Robert Owens a silent silhouette behind the wheel. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Hello? A woman's voice, unfamiliar and slightly breathless, answered. Zebb frowned, his free hand instinctively tightening around the phone cord. Hi. I got a page from this number. Is everything okay? A pause, heavy with unspoken tension. Who is this? This is Zebb Quinn. The line went dead. Zebb stared at the receiver, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather running down his spine. He glanced back at his car, where Robert was now leaning out the window, an unreadable expression on his face. Everything all right? Robert called out. Zebb hesitated, then nodded, forcing a smile he didn't feel. Yeah, just a wrong number, I guess. He jogged back to the car, sliding into the driver's seat. The warmth inside felt at odds with the cold dread settling in his stomach. So, we still heading to check out that eclipse? Robert asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, watching Zebb's every move. Zebb's hand hovered over the gear shift. The excitement he'd felt earlier about the car had evaporated, replaced by a nagging sense of unease. Actually, I'm not feeling so great. Mind if we rain check? Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sure, man. Whatever you want. Want me to drive? Nah, I got it, Zebb replied, pulling out of the gas station parking lot. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty road ahead. As they drove in silence, Zebb couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Robert spoke up. Hey, pull over for a sec. I think I dropped my phone. Zebb obliged, easing the car onto the shoulder of Long Shoals Road. They were near his old high school now, the building a looming shadow in the night. As soon as the car stopped, Robert was out, circling around to Zebb's side. I don't see, Zebb started to say, but his words were cut off as Robert wrenched open the driver's side door. What happened next was a blur of motion and panic. A struggle, muffled shouts, cold bite of the asphalt as Zebb was dragged from the car. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Robert's face, twisted with an emotion Zebb couldn't name. Hours later, Robert Owens sat in the interrogation room of the Asheville Police Department, story rehearsed and ready. We were headed to look at that Mitsubishi Eclipse, he said, his voice steady, eyes never leaving the detective's face. But Zebb got that page and wanted to call back. After that, he said he wasn't feeling well and wanted to go home. Detective Sarah Moran leaned forward, her pen poised over her notepad. And that's the last you saw of him? Robert nodded, his face a mask of concern. Yeah, he dropped me off at the Waffle House near Long Shoals Road and I-26. Said he was heading home. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I tried calling him later, but no answer. I figured he was just sleeping it off, you know? Detective Moran's eyes narrowed slightly. Mr. Owens, you mentioned earlier that you were in a car accident that night. Can you tell me more about that? Flicker of something, fear, annoyance, passed over Robert's face before it settled back into a neutral expression. Oh yeah. After Zebb dropped me off, I called my dad to pick me up. On the way home, we got rear-ended. Nothing serious, just a fender bender. And you didn't think to mention this earlier because... Robert shrugged. Didn't seem relevant, I guess. I mean, it happened after I last saw Zebb. As the interrogation continued across town, Denise Vlahakis paced her living room, phone clutched to her ear. No, he never came home last night, he said, voice trembling. This isn't like him at all. He would have called. The officer on the other end of the line tried to sound reassuring. Ma'am, I understand you're worried, but it's only been a day. Many times young people. No, Denise cut him off, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. You don't understand. Zebb wouldn't just disappear. Something's wrong. I can feel it. As she hung up the phone, Denise's gaze fell on a framed photo of Zebb in his ROTC uniform, his smile bright and full of promise. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the outline of her son's face. Where are you, baby? He whispered, tears sliding down her cheek. The mystery of Zebb Quinn's disappearance was just beginning to unfold, its tendrils reaching out to touch lives across Asheville. As the first day without Zebb drew to a close, no one could have imagined the long and twisted road that lay ahead, a road that would lead through decades of questions, suspicions, and heartbreak. In the growing darkness, Robert Owens drove home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The weight of his secrets pressed down on him, heavier than the night sky above. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Zebb's accusing eyes staring back at him. But there was only darkness. A darkness that seemed to whisper of things yet to come. Chapter 3: The Vanishing. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick January clouds hanging over Asheville, casting a gray pall over the city. At the Quinn household, Denise Vlahakis stood by the window, phone in hand, her eyes fixed on the empty driveway where Zebb's Mazda should have been parked. "This is the third time I'm calling, officer," she said, her voice strained with worry. "My son Zebb never came home last night, and he didn't show up for his shift at Walmart this morning. Something is wrong. I know it." The officer on the other end sighed, a sound that sent a spike of frustration through Denise. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but as I explained before, we can't file a missing persons report until it's been 24 hours. "I know," Denise finished, her free hand clenching into a fist. "But you don't understand. Zebb isn't the type to just disappear. He's responsible, he's in ROTC. He has plan." As she spoke, Denise's gaze fell on Zebb's college textbook, neatly stacked on the kitchen table. Next to them lay a brochure for officer training program, dog-eared and well-thumbed. The sight of these reminders of her son's ambitions made her throat tighten. "Please," she whispered into the phone. "Please help me find my son." Across town at the Asheville Police Department, Detective Sarah Moran was reviewing her notes from the previous night's interview with Robert Owens. Something about his story nagged at her, like a splinter just beneath the skin. "Hey Johnson," she called to her partner. "Did we get the accident report from that fender bender Owens mentioned?" Detective Johnson shook his head. "Nothing on file. I checked with Highway Patrol too. No reports matching his description." Moran leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "So either it was so minor they didn't report it, or he's lying," Johnson finished. Before they could discuss further, a uniformed officer approached, a look of urgency on his face. "Detectives, we just got a call from Walmart. Zebb Quinn didn't show up for his shift this morning. His mother's been calling them too, saying he never came home last night." Moran and Johnson exchanged a look. "All right," Moran said, standing up. "Let's go talk to the mother. Johnson, you head to Walmart, see what you can find out from his coworkers." As they left the station, neither detective could shake the feeling that they were about to step into something much bigger than a simple missing persons case. At Walmart, the atmosphere in the electronics department was tense. Employees huddled in small groups, their voices low as they speculated about Zebb's absence. "It's not like him at all," one young woman told Detective Johnson. "Zebb's always on time. He's saving up for a car, you know. He wouldn't just skip a shift." "Did he mention any plans for last night?" Johnson asked, his pen poised over his notepad. The woman shook her head. "Not really. Just that he was going to look at a car with Robert after their shift." "Robert? Robert Owens?" "Yeah, they usually work the same shifts, but Robert called in sick today too." Johnson's eyebrows rose at this new information. Both of them missing work on the same day? Interesting. Meanwhile, at the Quinn residence, Detective Moran sat across from Denise Vlahakis, watching as the worried mother clutched a mug of untouched coffee. "Mrs. Vlahakis, can you think of any reason why Zebb might have left without telling you? Any problems at home or school?" Denise shook her head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. Deb and I are close. He tells me everything. He was excited about looking at a new car last night. And this car, do you know who he was going with? His friend from work, Robert Owens. They've known each other for a while now." Moran made a note, her mind already connecting the dots between Robert's story and this new information. "Mrs. Vlahakis, we're going to do everything we can to find Zebb. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Denise looked up, her eyes wide with fear and hope. "Of course, anything. Is there any chance Zebb could have run away? Maybe to meet a girl, or—" "No, Denise said firmly, her voice cracking. "Detective, you have to understand. Zebb isn't just my son, he's my best friend. He wouldn't do this to me. Wouldn't just vanish without a word." Her eyes filled with tears. Something's happened to him. I can feel it. As Moran left the Quinn house, her phone buzzed with a text from Johnson. "Owen's called in sick today too. Something's not adding up." The detective paused on the front porch, looking out at the quiet Asheville street. Somewhere out there, Zebb Quinn had vanished into thin air, and with each passing hour, chances of finding him alive grew slimmer. Back at the station, flurry of activity had begun. Missing person flyers were being printed, featuring Zebb's smiling face and a description of his last known whereabouts. Officers were dispatched to canvass the area around Long Shoals Road and the Waffle House, where Robert claimed he'd last seen Zebb. As day turned to night, the city of Asheville seemed to hold its breath. On street corners and in coffee shops, people whispered about the vanished boy. Theories began to circulate, each more outlandish than the last. And somewhere, hidden from prying eyes, a secret lay buried, waiting to be unearthed. The mystery of Zebb Quinn's disappearance was only beginning, its tendrils reaching out to touch lives across the community, leaving no one untouched by the shadow of the unknown. Chapter 4. Puzzling Clues. The harsh January wind whipped through the nearly empty restaurant parking lot, carrying with it the acrid smell of exhaust and the faint aroma of grease from nearby diners. Detective Sarah Moran pulled her coat tighter around her as she approached the lone car sitting askew in the lot. Blue paint dulled by a thin layer of frost. "Is this it?" she called to the officer standing nearby. He nodded, his breath visible in the cold air. Zebb Quinn's Mazda protege. A waitress recognized it from the missing person flyers. "It's been here for days, apparently." Moran circled the vehicle slowly, her trained eyes taking in every detail. Car seemed undamaged, no signs of a struggle or foul play visible from the outside. But as she reached the driver's side window, she stopped short, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What the hell?" she muttered, leaning in for a closer look. There, on the foggy glass, were strange symbols drawn in what appeared to be lipstick, a pair of lips, 2 exclamation points, the number 8. "Johnson," she called to her partner. "You seeing this?" Detective Johnson joined her, his expression mirroring her bewilderment. "Lipstick drawings? What's that supposed to mean?" Before Moran could respond, a bark echoed through the parking lot. Both detectives turned to see a uniformed officer approaching, a squirming black Labrador puppy in his arms. "You're not going to believe this," the officer said, struggling to keep hold of the energetic pup. This little guy was inside the car, alive and kicking. Moran and Johnson exchanged incredulous looks. "A puppy? In a car that's been sitting here for days?" As if in response, the puppy let out another bark, its tail wagging furiously. "All right," Moran said, her mind racing to make sense of these bizarre clues. "Let's get forensics down here. I want this car gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and somebody find out where this puppy came from." As the crime scene bustled with activity across town at the Walmart where Zebb had worked, another piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. The store manager, a portly man named Frank, nervously wrung his hands as he spoke to Detective Johnson. "I didn't think much of it at the time," he said. "People call out sick all the time, you know?" Johnson nodded encouragingly. "But something about this call stood out to you?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. "It was the day after Zebb disappeared. We got a call from someone saying they were Zebb, calling out sick. But it didn't sound like him. The voice was off somehow." "Did you recognize the voice?" "No, but—" Frank lowered his voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. "Caller ID. It wasn't Zebb's number. It was from that Volvo plant over on Hendersonville Road." Johnson's pen paused over his notepad. "The Volvo plant? You're sure?" Frank nodded emphatically. "Positive. I remember thinking it was strange at the time." As Johnson left the Walmart, his mind was whirling. The Volvo plant, where Robert Owens worked. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was still frustratingly unclear. Back at the station, Moran was poring over the forensics report from Zebb's car. "No signs of struggle," she muttered to herself. "No blood, no fingerprints except Zebb's and Robert's. But we've got a hotel key card from a place in Leicester, and a jacket that doesn't belong to Zebb." She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The clues they had found seemed to pose more questions than they answered. Why the lipstick drawings? What was the significance of the puppy, and who had made that call to Walmart? A knock on her office door jolted her from her thoughts. It was Johnson, his face grim. "We've got another witness," he said. "A woman who says she saw someone driving Zebb's car the day after he disappeared. But here's the kicker. She says it wasn't Zebb behind the wheel. It was a woman." Moran's eyes widened. "A woman? Did she get a good look at her?" Johnson nodded, pulling out a sketch from his folder. "Good enough for this." Moran took the composite sketch, studying the face of the mystery woman. Something about her features tickled at the back of her mind, a half-formed connection she couldn't quite grasp. "We need to talk to Robert Owens again," she said finally. "We need to find out who this woman is." As the detectives prepared for their next moves, the city of Asheville buzzed with speculation. Strange clues found in Zebb's car had leaked to the press, and theories ran wild. Some spoke of secret love affairs, others of drug deals gone wrong. But beneath the gossip and conjecture, a current of fear ran through the community. If Zebb Quinn, a young man with a bright future, could vanish without a trace, who among them was truly safe? In her home, Denise Vlahakis sat surrounded by missing person flyers bearing her son's face. Her fingers traced the outline of his smile, a smile she feared she might never see again. "Where are you, Zebb?" she whispered to the empty room. "What happened to you?" The mystery deepened, each new clue seeming to lead further into a labyrinth of confusion and misdirection. But somewhere, buried beneath the layers of deception and fear, the truth about Zebb Quinn's disappearance waited to be uncovered, and Detective Moran was determined to find it, no matter the cost. Chapter 5: Unraveling Relationships. The interrogation room at the Asheville Police Department felt smaller than ever as Detective Sarah Moran faced Robert Owens across the metal table. His lanky frame was hunched, his eyes darting nervously around the room, never quite meeting her gaze. "Let's go over this one more time, Robert," Moran said, her voice steady and measured. "You say you last saw Zebb when he dropped you off at the Waffle House, correct?" Robert nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "That's right. Like I said before, he got that weird page, and then said he wasn't feeling well." Moran leaned forward, her eyes boring into Robert's face. "And you didn't think to mention that you called in sick to Walmart the next day? From the Volvo plant where you work?" A flicker of panic crossed Robert's face before he schooled his features back into a mask of confusion. I don't remember doing that. Are you sure?" "We have the phone records, Robert. Why would you pretend to be Zebb?" Robert's composure cracked, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "I was worried about him, okay? He wasn't answering his phone, and I thought maybe if I called in for him, he wouldn't lose his job." Moran sat back, her skepticism evident. "That's quite a risk to take for a friend, Robert. Is there something you're not telling us about your relationship with Zebb?" As Robert stammered through another unconvincing explanation, across town, Detective Johnson was knocking on the door of a modest suburban home. A young woman answered, her eyes widening in recognition of his badge. "Misty Taylor?" Johnson asked. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this about Zebb?" Inside, Misty perched on the edge of her couch, twisting a tissue in her hands as she spoke. "Zebb and we met at a Christmas party. He was sweet, you know, different from other guys." Johnson nodded encouragingly. "Did you two start dating?" Misty shook her head, her eyes downcast. "No, not really. We talked a lot, but—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "But what, Misty?" She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "My boyfriend Wesley. He found out Zebb and I were talking. He got angry, jealous." Johnson leaned forward, his pen poised over his notepad. "Did Wesley threaten Zebb?" Misty's silence spoke volumes. Back at the station, Moran was piecing together the new information. The love triangle involving Zebb, Misty, and Wesley added a new dimension to the case. Potential motive that couldn't be ignored. Her phone buzzed with a text from Johnson. "Taylor girl's boyfriend has priors for assault, bringing him in for questioning." Moran's mind raced. Could Wesley Smith be the key to unraveling this mystery? Or was he just another red herring in an increasingly complex case? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her office door. A young officer entered, looking flustered. Detective, we've got a problem. That page Zebb received the night he disappeared, we traced it. Came from his aunt's house. Moran's eyebrows shot up. His aunt? Ina Ustich? The officer nodded. But here's the weird part. She swears she never made that call. The web of connections and contradictions was growing more tangled by the minute. Moran grabbed her coat, her mind made up. I need to talk to this aunt myself. As she drove to Ina Ustich's house, Moran couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The lipstick drawings, Puppy, the mysterious woman driving Zebb's car. How did it all fit together? Ina Ustich answered her door warily, eyes red-rimmed from crying. I've already told the other officers. I didn't page Zebb that night, she said, before Moran could even introduce herself. I understand, Mrs. Matt Ustich, Moran said gently, but I need to ask you a few more questions. Is it possible someone else in your house could have made that call? Ina shook her head vehemently. I live alone, and I was at a dinner party that night at Misty Taylor's mother's house. Moran's ears perked up at this. Misty Taylor? You know her family? Course, Ina replied. Misty's mother and I are old friends. Wesley was there too, come to think of it. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was still frustratingly unclear. As Moran left Ina's house, her phone rang. It was Johnson. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice tight with excitement. We got a hit on that jacket found in Zebb's car. It belongs to Wesley Smith. Moran's heart raced as she processed this new information. The love triangle, the mysterious page, the jacket, it all seemed to point to Wesley Smith. Something still didn't feel right. Robert Owen's strange behavior, the woman seen driving Zebb's car. There were too many loose ends. As she drove back to the station, Moran's mind whirled with possibility. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of a breakthrough, but also that they were missing something vital. The truth about Zebb Quinn's disappearance was out there, hidden beneath layers of lies, jealousy, and fear. And somewhere in Asheville, someone was carrying the weight of a terrible secret, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally come to light. Chapter 6. Cold Case Grows Colder. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in Detective Sarah Moran's office seemed to mock the passage of time. Days had turned into weeks, weeks into months, and now, as she stared at the calendar, Moran realized with a sinking heart that it had been a year since Zebb Quinn's disappearance. The case file on her desk had grown thick with reports, witness statements, and dead-end leads. Each page represented a thread of hope that had ultimately unraveled, leaving them no closer to the truth than they had been on that cold January night when Zebb vanished. Moran rubbed her tired eyes, the faces of key players in the case swimming before her. Robert Owens, with his shifting stories and nervous demeanor. Wesley Smith, whose jacket had been found in Zebb's car, but who had an alibi for the night of the disappearance. Misty Taylor, caught in the middle of a love triangle she never asked for. And Zebb himself, smiling from the missing person flyer that had become a familiar sight around Asheville. A knock on her door jolted Moran from her reverie. It was Johnson, his face grim. Sarah, we've got a problem. The chief wants to move Zebb's case to the cold case files. Moran felt a surge of anger and frustration. We can't just give up, Dave. He's out there somewhere. We're missing something. I know it. Johnson sighed, sinking into the chair across from her desk. I know how you feel, but we've run down every lead. The evidence is circumstantial at best, without a body or a confession. His words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Without new evidence, the case would remain unsolved, another mystery to haunt the streets of Asheville. Across town, in a modest living room that had become a shrine to a missing son, Denise Vlahakis sat surrounded by newspaper clippings, photos, and handwritten notes. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now carried the dull sheen of grief barely held at bay. A news report droned on in the background, the anchor's voice a monotone as he recounted the details of Zebb's disappearance. It's been 1 year since Asheville teen Zebb Quinn vanished without a trace. Despite extensive searches and a thorough investigation, police have yet to make an arrest in the case. Denise muted the TV, unable to bear hearing the facts of her son's disappearance, recited like a grocery list. She picked up a framed photo of Zebb in his ROTC uniform, a smile bright and full of promise. I haven't given up on you, baby. she whispered, her voice cracking. I'll never give up. Meanwhile, life in Asheville continued its relentless march forward. The Walmart where Zebb had worked buzzed with activity, new faces replacing the old. In the electronics department, a young employee restocked shelves, unaware he was standing in the very spot where Zebb had once dreamed of his future. Robert Owens, his own life a study in contrasts, had moved on to a series of odd jobs and minor scrapes with the law. Each time he was brought in for questioning, his story remained frustratingly consistent in its inconsistency. As the case grew colder, it began to take on a life of its own in the public imagination. True crime enthusiasts pored over every detail, spinning theories that ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Internet forums buzzed with speculation, each new post promising to be the key that would unlock the mystery. One evening, as Moran was leaving the station, she overheard two rookie officers discussing the case. I heard it was alien abduction, one said, his voice a mix of jest and genuine wonder. Nah, his partner replied. My money's on witness protection. Kid probably saw something he shouldn't have. Moran shook her head as she walked past, a sad smile playing on her lips. If only the truth were so simple, so easily explained away. The years continued to pass, each one adding another layer of dust to the case file. Zebb Quinn's story began to appear on true crime shows. His face beamed into living rooms across the country. Disappeared dedicated an entire episode to his case, recreating those last known moments in painstaking detail. Denise Vlahakis watched each show, each news report, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere would see it and remember something crucial. But the phone remained silent. Promised breaks in the case never materialized. In quiet moments, Moran found herself returning to the evidence locker, pulling out the artifacts of Zebb's last known night. The lipstick-drawn symbols on the car window still defied explanation. Puppy, long since adopted by a loving family, remained a baffling addition to an already perplexing case. As another anniversary of Zebb's disappearance approached, Moran stood in front of the evidence board in her office. String-connected photos and notes, a web of information that somehow failed to capture the truth. He traced a line from Zebb's photo to Robert's, then to Wesley's, then to Misty's. Somewhere in this tangle of relationships and half-truths lay the answer. Where are you, Zebb? She murmured, echoing the question that had haunted Asheville for years. What really happened that night? Outside her window, the city of Asheville continued to grow and change, its skyline evolving as new buildings rose and old ones fell. But beneath the surface of progress, the mystery of Zebb Quinn's disappearance remained. Cold case that refused to be forgotten, waiting for the day when the truth would finally come to light. Chapter 7. A shocking development. The summer of 2015 descended on Asheville with a sweltering intensity, the heat seeming to amplify the restless energy that had been building in the city for years. Detective Sarah Moran, now with streaks of gray in her once dark hair, sat at her desk, absently fanning herself with a case file. 15 years had passed since Zebb Quinn's disappearance, and while the case had never truly left her, it had faded into the background of her daily work. That was about to change. The door to her office burst open, revealing a breathless young officer. Detective Moran, you need to see this. He thrust a tablet into her hands, its screen displaying a breaking news report. Moran's eyes widened as she read the headline, Local Man Arrested for Murder of Food Network Star and Husband. But it was the accompanying photo that made her heart race. Staring back at her, older but unmistakable, was the face of Robert Owens. Get me everything we have on this case, Moran barked, already reaching for her phone. And get Johnson in here, now. As the station erupted into a flurry of activity, across town, Denise Vlahakis sat in her kitchen, her trembling hands clutching a cup of cold coffee. The TV droned on in the background, but she barely registered the words until a familiar name cut through her fog of grief. Robert Owens, a person of interest in the long unsolved disappearance of Asheville teen Zebb Quinn, has been arrested for the brutal murders of Food Network star Christy Shone Codd and her husband, Joseph J.T. Codd. The mug slipped from Denise's grasp, shattering on the floor. For years she had clung to a fragile hope that her son might still be alive somewhere. Now, that hope seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. At the Buncombe County Courthouse, Moran and Johnson pushed through a sea of reporters, their faces grim with determination. Inside, they found District Attorney Ron Moore, his expression a mix of excitement and caution. "We've got him on the Cod murders," Moore said without preamble. "But I know what you're thinking. This could be our chance to finally crack the Quinn case." Moran nodded, her mind already racing. "We need to search his property, every inch of it." "Already on it," Moore replied. "I've got a team assembling as we speak." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. As news of Robert Owen's arrest spread, the city of Asheville seemed to hold its collective breath. Old wounds were reopened, long-buried memories resurfaced, and the name Zebb Quinn was once again on everyone's lips. At Robert Owen's property, a grim scene unfolded. Forensic teams combed through years of accumulated debris, now each shovelful of earth holding the potential for a breakthrough, or another dead end. It was on the third day of the search that a young CSI called out, her voice tight with excitement and dread. "Detective Moran, we've found something." Moran rushed over, her heart pounding. There, partially unearthed from beneath an old fish pond, was a tangle of fabric and bone. "Get the medical examiner here now," Moran ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. Could this finally be it? Answer to the question that had haunted her 15 years. As the sun set on Asheville that evening, casting long shadows across the crime scene, palpable tension hung in the air. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern-day divining rods, searching for the truth. In her living room, Denise Vlahakis sat surrounded by friends and family, their presence a bulwark against the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Hope and fear warred within her heart as she waited for news, any news, about her long-lost son. Back at the station, Moran and Johnson pored over the preliminary reports from the scene. The bones were human, that much was certain. Whose? What did it mean for their case? "We can't jump to conclusions," Johnson cautioned, ever the voice of reason. "We need to wait for the DNA results." Moran nodded, but her instincts were screaming. After 15 years of dead ends and false starts, they were on the verge of something big. She could feel it. As midnight approached, Moran found herself standing in front of the evidence board that had dominated her office for so long. The faded photos and yellowing notes seemed to pulse with new significance. She traced a line from Zebb's smiling face to Robert's mugshot, then to the grainy image of the bones unearthed from his property. "What's your secret, Robert?" she murmured, her eyes narrowing. "What have you been hiding all these years?" Outside, the city of Asheville slept fitfully, its dreams haunted by the ghosts of the past and the promise of revelations to come. The mystery that had defined a generation was teetering on the brink of resolution, ready to spill its long-held secrets into the harsh light of day. As a new dawn broke over the mountains, Detective Sarah Moran steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Whatever the coming days might bring, one thing was certain: the case of Zebb Quinn was about to break wide open, and nothing in Asheville would ever be the same again. Chapter 8. Breaking the Case. The fluorescent lights of the Buncombe County Courthouse buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Moran stood before a sea of reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. The weight of 15 years pressed down on her shoulders as she cleared her throat, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions roiling within her. "Today, I can confirm that Robert Jason Owens has been indicted for the murder of Zebb Quinn," she announced, the words hanging in the air like smoke. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a barrage of questions. Moran held up a hand, silencing the clamor. "While we cannot disclose all details of the ongoing investigation, we believe we have sufficient evidence to proceed with prosecution." As Moran fielded questions, her mind raced back to the whirlwind of the past few weeks. The bones found on Owen's property had not belonged to Zebb, but their discovery had opened floodgates. Old witnesses came forward with new information, their memories sharpened by the passage of time and the shock of recent events. One by one, the puzzle pieces had fallen into place. Advanced forensic techniques had revealed trace evidence in Zebb's car that linked directly to Owen's. The mysterious lipstick drawings, long a source of bafflement, now pointed to a clumsy attempt at misdirection. But it was the testimony of a former cellmate of Owen's that had finally tipped the scales. The man claimed Owens had confessed to him during a moment of drunken vulnerability, describing in chilling detail how he had ended Zebb's life on that cold January night in 2000. As Moran wrapped up the press conference, she caught sight of Denise Vlahakis standing at the back of the room, her face a mask of complex emotions. Their eyes met, a wordless exchange passing between them. After 15 years of uncertainty, they were finally on the path to justice, but at what cost? The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented in Asheville's history. National news vans clogged the streets, their anchors breathlessly recounting the details of the case to a captivated audience. True crime enthusiasts descended on the city, combing through old haunts and speculating wildly on internet forums. In the midst of the chaos, Moran and her team worked tirelessly to build their case. They re-interviewed witnesses, pored over old evidence with new eyes, and pieced together a timeline that finally made sense of that fateful night. The theory they constructed was both simple and heartbreaking in its banality. There had been no grand conspiracy, no elaborate plot. Just a moment of jealousy, a flash of rage, and a series of desperate attempts to cover up an unthinkable act. As the trial date approached, tension in Asheville reached a fever pitch. Courthouse became a circus, with protesters and supporters of both Zebb and Owens facing off daily. Security was tight, the memory of other high-profile trials keeping everyone on edge. In her office, Moran sat across from District Attorney Ron Moore, both of them looking haggard from sleepless nights and endless preparation. "Are we ready for this, Sarah?" Moore asked, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of frustration and hope. Moran nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We have to be. For Zebb, for Denise, for this whole damned city." The night before the trial was set to begin, Moran found herself standing on Long Shoals Road, near the spot where Zebb was last seen alive. The street had changed over the years, new businesses sprouting up where empty lots once stood. But as she closed her eyes, she could almost see the ghost of a blue Mazda Protégé. Two young men inside, their futures stretching out before them like an open road. "We're almost there, Zebb," she whispered to the night air. "Just hang on a little longer." As dawn broke on the first day of the trial, Asheville held its collective breath. Courthouse steps were a sea of faces. Some familiar, worn by years of grief and uncertainty, others new, drawn by the promise of justice long delayed. Inside, as Robert Owens was led into the courtroom, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Moran watched him closely, searching for any sign of the scared young man she had interviewed all those years ago. But his face was a mask, revealing nothing of the secrets he had carried for so long. As the judge called the court to order, Moran felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Denise Vlahakis, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Whatever happens," Denise said softly, "thank you for never giving up." Moran nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she took her seat, she felt the weight of 15 years of investigation, countless sleepless nights and dead ends, of a community's loss and a mother's unending grief. The prosecutor stood, ready to deliver his opening statement. In that moment, as the first words of the trial rang out, Moran knew that regardless of the outcome, Asheville would never be the same. The long shadow cast by Zebb Quinn's disappearance was finally lifting, revealing a truth that would change everything. The trial of Robert Owens was about to begin, and with it the final chapter in a mystery that had defined a generation. Chapter 9: Revelations and Confessions. The courtroom was thick with tension as the trial of Robert Owens entered its third week. The prosecution had presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, weaving together a narrative of jealousy, impulsive violence, and years of deception. But as compelling as their case was, they still lacked the one thing that could seal Owens' fate: confession. Detective Sarah Moran sat in the gallery, her eyes never leaving Owens as he slouched at the defense table. She had testified earlier in the week, recounting the long and winding road that had led them to this moment. Now, as the defense prepared to rest its case, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. It happened during the final day of testimony. Robert Owens, against the advice of his lawyers, took the stand. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as he was sworn in, his voice barely audible as he promised to tell the truth. What followed was a confession that stunned even the most seasoned observers. Owens spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if a dam had broken inside him. "I didn't mean to kill Zebb," he said, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. "It was supposed to be a warning, you know? To stay away from Misty." As Owens continued, painting a picture of that fateful night in excruciating detail, Moran felt a chill run down her spine. The truth, it turned out, was both simpler and more horrifying than anyone had imagined. There had been no elaborate plot, no premeditated murder, just a moment of blind rage, a scuffle that went too far, and a panicked young man who made the worst decision of his life. "I didn't know what to do," Owen said, his voice cracking. "I was scared, so I hid him, and then I tried to make it look like he'd just disappeared." The lipstick drawings, puppy in the car, the mysterious woman seen driving Zebb's vehicle, all of it had been a clumsy attempt at misdirection, born of desperation and fueled by late-night crime shows. As Owens spoke, Moran glanced at Denise Vlahakis. The grieving mother sat rigid in her seat, face a mask of pain and disbelief. 15 years of uncertainty were crumbling away, replaced by a truth almost too terrible to bear. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As Owens neared the end of his testimony, he dropped a bombshell that sent ripples of shock through the courtroom. "My uncle," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gene Owens. He helped me dispose of Zebb's body." Courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge called for order as reporters rushed from the room, eager to break the news. Moran sat stunned, her mind racing. Gene Owens had died years ago, taking whatever secrets he knew to the grave. But if what Robert was saying was true? In the days that followed, as the jury deliberated, Moran and her team worked tirelessly to corroborate Owens' story. They combed through old records, re-interviewed witnesses, and scoured the area where Owens claimed his uncle had buried Zebb's remains. The case that had defined Moran's career, that had haunted Asheville for over 2 decades, was finally coming to a close. But as the pieces fell into place, she couldn't shake the feeling that this resolution was both a triumph and a tragedy. On the day the verdict was to be read, courthouse was surrounded by a sea of people. Some held candles, others clutched photos of Zebb. The air was thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of collective grief. Inside, as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict, Moran held her breath. Guilty, on all counts. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Denise Vlahakis sobbed openly, years of pent-up anguish finally finding release. Robert Owens stood impassively as the judge pronounced his sentence. Life in prison, the possibility of parole after 59 years. As the courtroom began to empty, Moran found herself face to face with Owens one last time. For a moment, she saw not the hardened criminal, the scared young man she had interviewed all those years ago. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "For everything." Moran nodded, unable to find words. As Owens was led away, she turned to find Denise Vlahakis standing beside her. "Is it really over?" Denise asked, her voice trembling. Moran put an arm around the grieving mother's shoulders. "The trial is over," he said softly. "But I promise you, we won't stop until we bring Zebb home." As they walked out of the courthouse together, into the fading light of a long Asheville evening, Moran knew that while one chapter had closed, another was just beginning. The search for Zebb's remains, quest to bring him home to his mother, would continue. The mystery of Zebb Quinn's disappearance had been solved, but its impact on Asheville, on the lives of all those touched by the case, would resonate for years to come. And somewhere out there, in the rolling hills of North Carolina, lay the final piece of the puzzle. Waiting to be found, waiting to bring a measure of peace to a community that had waited far too long. Answers. Chapter 10. Unresolved Mystery. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office cast long shadows as Detective Sarah Moran stood before a large map of Asheville and its surrounding areas. Red pins dotted the landscape, each representing a potential location where Zebb Quinn's remains might be found. Despite Robert Owens' confession and conviction, this final, crucial piece of the puzzle remained elusive. "We've covered every inch of the area Owens described," Johnson said, his voice heavy with frustration. "If Zebb was buried there, we should have found something by now." Moran nodded, her eyes never leaving the map. Unless Owens lied about the location, or his memory is faulty after all these years. The search for Zebb's remains had become a mission of its own, separate from the trial and conviction that had seemingly closed the case. For Moran, and for Denise Vlahakis, there would be no true closure until Zebb was brought home. As weeks turned into months, the search continued. Volunteers combed through dense forests and steep ravines. Cadaver dogs were brought in, their handlers hopeful but increasingly discouraged as each search ended in disappointment. The media attention that had once blazed so brightly began to wane. The reporters who had camped outside the courthouse during the trial packed up and moved on to the next big story. But for those closest to the case, quest for answers burned as fiercely as ever. One crisp autumn morning, Moran found herself standing in the Bent Creek area, where Robert had claimed his uncle had buried Zebb. The leaves crunched underfoot as she surveyed the landscape, trying to see it through the eyes of a panicked young man and his accomplice on that fateful night so long ago. Detective Moran? She turned to see a young officer approaching, his face a mix of excitement and apprehension. "We've got something. Hiker found what looks like, well, you should come see for yourself." Moran's heart raced as she followed the officer deeper into the woods. Could this finally be it? The breakthrough they'd been waiting for? But as she crested a small hill and saw the gathered forensics team, her hope turned to ash. The remains were nothing more than old animal bones, likely from a deer or large dog. As she turned away, fighting back tears of frustration, phone buzzed. It was a text from Denise Vlahakis. "Any news?" Moran's fingers hovered over the keypad. How many times had she had to disappoint this woman who had already lost so much? With a heavy heart, she typed out a simple response. "Not yet. We're not giving up." Back at the station, Moran found herself once again facing the evidence board that had dominated her office for so long. Photos of Zebb, Robert, and all the other players in this tragic drama stared back at her. The lipstick drawings, once so mysterious, now seemed almost comically amateurish in light of what they knew. "What are we missing?" she murmured to herself, her eyes tracing the connections between each piece of evidence. A knock at her door jolted her from her reverie. It was Johnson, holding a thick file. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "We got the results back from that polygraph test Owens took about his uncle's involvement." Moran's eyebrows shot up. "And he passed, with flying colors." The implications of this new information set Moran's mind reeling. If Owens was telling the truth about his uncle's involvement, then why couldn't they find Zebb's remains? What else might Gene Owens have done that his nephew didn't know about? As the sun set on another day of fruitless searching, Moran found herself driving to Denise Vlahakis' house. She had made this trip countless times over the years, but tonight felt different. The weight of unresolved questions pressed down on her, making the familiar route feel somehow longer, more daunting. Denise answered the door, her face a study in hope and fear. "Sarah, is there news?" Moran shook her head, stepping inside. "Not exactly, but I wanted to talk to you about something." Over cups of tea that grew cold as they talked, Moran laid out the latest developments, or lack thereof, in the search for Zebb. She explained about the polygraph test, about the continued dead ends in their search efforts. "Denise," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything at all that you haven't told us? Any detail, no matter how small, that might help us find Zebb?" Denise's hands trembled as she set down her cup. For a long moment she was silent, her eyes fixed on a photo of Zebb that sat on the mantel. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There is something I've never told anyone." As Denise began to speak, unraveling a thread of the story that had remained hidden for over 2 decades, Moran felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. The case that had defined her career, that had haunted her dreams and waking hours for so long, was not yet finished. The mystery of Zebb Quinn's disappearance had been solved, but its final chapter remained unwritten. As night fell over Asheville, casting long shadows across a city forever changed by this tragedy, Detective Sarah Moran steeled herself for one last push. Somewhere out there, Zebb was waiting to be found, and she would not rest until she brought him home. The end.